Hi everyone and welcome. I would like to talk to you about adding users to your server this week. So this section is going to be on user management. We're going to be talking about some of the common things that we might need to set up for our users, how to add or delete users and reset their passwords, how to securely manage users on your server, and how to create control groups and some of the common groups that you might see. One of the things that makes servers both wonderful and terrible is that you have users on them. Now, you can set up a server and make it the most beautiful thing in the world, but as soon as you add other people, we're obviously going to descend into a bit of chaos. However, the whole point of a server is that it can help serve people information, so we have no choice. Now, some things that we should think about when we're talking about users on servers is we should consider best practices. So, for example, if somebody is being hired or fired from a company, there should be a written out procedure that would need to happen for the, let's say, hiring. So when we have a new hire, they're going to need to be added to a server. They might need some access to some documents. They might need to have some specific permissions. If it's a larger company, there might be multiple servers that they're added to. Whenever you have written out procedures, it doesn't hurt to make a script for these procedures to make sure that they are being done the exact same way for everybody every time. It also means that it's easier for other people to be able to run the script so that you aren't stuck sort of doing everything. A corollary to this is it's really important to document everything and keep your documentation up to date. We started talking about documentation in the previous section, what is a server, but it's just going to be even more important as we start working with our servers that we are writing down everything that we have. So we write it down for both our benefit and for other people's benefit. It's important that we know what we've done to the server and when, but it's also really important that other people know what we've done to the server, when we did it, what's going on with the server to make sure that everybody's on the same page. Some other best practices that we should think about is the access for the server. So in a lot of cases, servers will actually lock down the admin or root accounts unless they're absolutely needed. A lot of servers will actually not have root be one of the allowed remote logins. Your only option will be sudo. You can also sometimes remove some of the remote access. However, especially after we've had COVID and still working with that and so many things happening remotely, it's not really reasonable to not have remote access. The best you can really hope for is limit who has access and make sure that you have all of your procedures and requirements documented and that those documents are being followed. It's really important to make sure that you have a backup policy and you are following the backup policy for your server. You're going to want to make sure you back up everything and give some consideration for on-site, as in we have our backup with us, or off-site, we have our backup elsewhere, potentially controlled by us or a third party. And we want to make sure that we're both backing up the data on the server, but also all of the settings and programs that are on a server. As I'm sure all of you know from getting started with a brand new computer, there's the data that you'll need to migrate over, but even some of the settings that you might have on that computer can take a little while. And with servers, it's really not the case that we have that much time. So because servers have so many users and so many use cases where they're really critical to the setup of a company, they really can't have downtime. And because servers really can't have downtime, making sure that you have everything backed up so that you can, for example, switch one image out for another and have the server down for maybe 2 minutes or 3 minutes rather than 5 hours is a huge difference. Some other things that we might want to think about are things like single sign-on or multiple accounts. How are we doing our authentication? And do we have multi-factor authentication on our server? Are we worried about things like sending a text message or having an authenticator app or anything like that? Now, for users, user security and least privilege. The idea behind least privilege is when we have our users on a server, we want to give them the exact amount of access that they need to do their job, but no more. It is important that you are careful and polite about how you do your least privilege. Least privilege for a server means that you are less likely to have people accidentally changing or doing things to your server, but it can also lead to antagonism between you and the users of the server. Because by default, people are going to say, well, just, give me access to everything. Well, just give me all the permissions. Don't worry about it. I'm fine. And you have to be able to deal with that in a reasonable way that isn't, basically look at them and saying, no, you're an idiot. You've proved that you're an idiot. So no, that's not one of our options. We have to make sure that we're explaining why we are setting things up, to some extent, and saying, okay, well, if you are working on development, let me give you access to testing. If you're working on production, let me give you access to production. But, maybe they don't need access to development logging or production logging or the server monitoring or those things. Maybe they only need access to some of it. So you want to figure out what those minimums are, give those minimums, and then be ready that you might need to give more on request. When we have users on a server, we have the admin account. So in Linux, we'll call this root. And then we also have sudo. Now, the difference is when we have somebody who's logged in as root, that means everything that they are doing, they are the root user. So they have absolute access to every single thing. And as you may know from Linux, a lot of things don't give you warning, so it's very easy to delete or make changes, and the computer is not necessarily going to ask if you're sure. It'll just be like, oh, yeah, okay, well, you know what you're doing, here you go. Whereas with sudo, super user do this. The idea is that we can choose which commands we are running as with root privileges, or however we want to set that up, and that can give us a little bit more protection. So not everything needs to be done as root. If we're creating files and folders on the server or scripts, they might not need to be done as root. They could just be created as us and then run as root if they need that permission. So sudo gives us the ability to say, I want to run this command or that command as root rather than trying to log in as root to do everything. We need to pay attention to disk usage for our users, make sure that they have an appropriate amount of space that is, not so big that it's taking over the whole server, but not so small that they can't do their job. And then we're also going to have some tools that will help us with user security, such as things like fail-to-ban. So one of the things that we'll do for user security is we will have limits on the amount of times users can attempt logging into the system so that we can hopefully try to avoid some of the more malicious actors. So if we have somebody that, say, tried to log into the system 3 times, in industry, that might be a very reasonable thing. More than 3, maybe it's a bot. Maybe somebody has a compromised password or there's just some kind of a problem. However, there's going to be situations where this is different. For example, at Northern Essex, I'm one of the admins on the CIS server, and I actually have more than 3 attempted logins because I know that the Intro to Linux class is going to be on that server, and I know that people that are not used to Linux are going to mess up their password multiple times, and I don't necessarily want to block them for that. Instead, what I want to do is allow them more attempts and just really minimize what they are allowed to do on the server and the access that they have so that if something does go wrong, it's as much of a minimal problem as possible. Now, password management is the next thing that we talk about with users. When we talk about users, we have to make sure that they have reasonable passwords. Some things that we have to think about is when they are authenticated onto the server, do we have multi-factor authentication? Is there a text message, email, authenticator app? How long is the password length? Now, for password management, it's really important that we both have a set of policies. We document these policies, and we share these policies with our users. So you want to be very clear with your users that they have to have a password and what the requirements are for that password. Do they need to have a 12, 16, 20 character password? Do they need to have special characters, numbers, capital letters in their password? Are they going to need to change their password frequently? So right now, it is no longer recommended that you change your passwords frequently. Basically, everybody has moved away from that. And instead, what we do is say you can have your password, and then we'll only make you change your password if we think there's been a breach, because we know that people are basically bad at remembering passwords, and the less that we have them change their password, the more secure the passwords are always going to be. One of the issues is, like, if you say, okay, well, you have to change your password every 90 days, then you're going to have people that are going to do things like, fall 22, spring 23, summer 23, and like technically, yes, it is a different password, but nobody's going to consider that secure. We can also give some considerations to extra password management that we might want to have depending on the sensitivity of the server. We can, for example, restrict using old passwords, so we can check if this password has been used previously by this user ever, or is this one of the last 4 or 5 passwords. We can also check to see if the password has been stolen. So we can go to something like have I been pwned, and we can say, has this password been stolen before? If yes, then we don't want to allow it. We can also do things like calculate how long it would take to brute force a password, and then we can have that be part of our policy. Like, the password cannot be brute forced in less than 5 years, 10 years, whatever it happens to be, before we will allow them to change the password to that. Now, on our system, we are going to have different types of accounts. We have the sort of user accounts, which is going to be people logging into the system, but we're actually also going to have some system accounts. For example, we might have Apache for web services. We might have daemons for background processes. We're going to have some admin accounts. Because Linux is a multi-user system, there's lots of different types of accounts that we might end up seeing on our server, and we can actually go and look and see what's already in there, what's been added, stuff like that. Now, on your server, there's going to be some key files. However, I need to make a note here. These key files may not be called this, and they may not be in this listed location, depending on the server that you are looking at. I have made this list with some descriptions so that you can go find these files on your server. And it is important that you know where these files are and what they are called on your specific system. For example, you want to make sure that you know where your password file is. You want to know where your shadow file is. That's the encrypted passwords. You want to know where the group list is. You want to know where the sudoers list is. You may want to know things like where the message of the day is and the starting directory setup is. Now, normally in class, I would have an activity. Because this is online, what I'm going to say is pause me here and go find those files in your system. Create a document that has the location of each of those files, and make a document for each of your servers. That way you can start to get familiar with the file system that you're looking at, because it's not going to be the same across all flavors of Linux. Next, we can start looking at some users and groups. Now, users are identified by a UID. Groups are identified by a group ID. These will default to sequential numbering. We want to think about why we use groups, what usernames are, and we need to think about what names are on the server and how we are setting up those names. What I mean by that: when we start talking about users on a server, a lot of times we will actually write a script to add users to our server. It is important that we think about the names of the users and how those are put together as we are adding the users to our server. There's actually some things like a Twitter account that is basically people complaining about their name, their real name, not being able to be used for specific companies. For example, you'll notice my name has a hyphen in it. My name is Adriana Holden-Gouveia. Because it has a hyphen, that particular character is actually not always allowed in all usernames. So normally what I do is I remove it, and so you can see, like, for example, in my website, I don't have a hyphen in there. It just says Holden-Gouveia altogether. This is one of the things that you might see. However, if we look at names all around the world, we will actually see some different issues in terms of what the names look like, the format of the names, the characters that are in the names, even the order of first name, last name. Is there a first name and a last name? And because we have companies that have to be able to work with everybody all around the world, it's worth thinking about what is the name, how are they put together, and how are you checking this. So the next thing that we can look at is groups. Think about the groups that we might have on our server. For example, maybe we'll have developers, maybe we'll have testers. Everybody should have a home directory. You can go find yours. Does everybody have the same one? These are all questions you might need to answer for your server. Shells are how we are able to interact with the server. So the most common shell is Bash. However, we might have other people that would like to interact with a server using a different shell. For example, developers might want to use C shell. And we need to be able to set it up so that their defaults are whatever works best for them. We might also see things like no login or false shell, things like that. Those options are a way that we can identify either accounts that shouldn't be remotely logging in, such as Apache for the web portion of a server. The Apache user shouldn't be logging in remotely. That should be a process that's happening through Apache, and if somebody is trying to remote log in as Apache, you have problems. One of the things we can do if we want to cycle out users is we can use a false shell or a no login. That way we can keep all of the data from the users, we just aren't allowing them to log into the system so that we have a record of everything that they've done and we haven't lost anything. Most companies will have a policy about that. If yours doesn't, consider having a policy, writing it down, and making sure you get buy-in. Admin accounts. So we have sudo. Sudo is going to run a single command with root privilege. You can do su and you can switch to the root user. You can also do the bang bang. That is 2 exclamation points, and that is run the previous command. So for example, one of the things that I will do very frequently is I will forget which commands need to be run as sudo and which don't. So I'll run a command, I'll get a permission denied error, I'll curse at my machine, and then I'll say at the command prompt sudo space bang bang enter, and that will run my previous command as sudo without me having to type out the whole thing. Because I am frankly lazy, the less typing I have to do, the better. Now with admin accounts, we also have 2 options of how we can set up people to have more access than the average bear. We have the wheel group and we have sudoers. Now, wheel is basically you have root access. This is considered legacy and it is no longer recommended that you use it. The current recommendation is that you use sudoers. Sudoers, the group, has more control. You can add people to the sudoers group to give them access, more access, specific kinds of access, access to specific areas. And we can have a lot more options with sudoers versus wheel is just like, here, have everything. Good luck. And then we do also have root. For the most part, it's not recommended that you log in as root or work as root because that can give you some difficulties. I hope you all enjoy the meme that you were looking at. It is a picture of Groot yelling, "I am root." I thought it was hilarious. Some frequently used commands that you might see as you are working with users on the system. We might want to add a user, modify, or delete a user. We might want to change passwords, modify password information or when it expires. We might want to see who's logged in last, or add passwords for an entire group. And these are some of the frequently used commands that we might see. Some other things that we might see on our system are some useful scripts. One of the things that I would recommend is that you take a little bit of time and try to code these scripts. Normally, there would be an activity in class where we would do this together, but obviously that's not possible right now. So I would say take a little bit of time. And if you go to my website at the bottom of the user page, there's actually an activity set. One of them is for adding users. I have a level 1 and a level 2 list of usernames that you can try. And so some useful scripts that you might want to consider starting are things like bulk adding users, bulk deleting users with or without file cleanup, monitoring disk usage, listing accounts that have never logged in, and listing files that were taken off the server. This is exfiltration, so that we can do things like check and see what has been removed off of our server when. So starting to sort of experiment with these scripts in a language of your choice is a good idea so that you can start getting some practice working with users. Now, I would recommend starting to do this one by one. So add a single user, delete a single user, modify a single user. Once you're comfortable with that, then consider trying to make a script that will do this. Remember, you can do your scripts in Bash, but you can also do your scripts in a programming language of your choice, for example, Python. And that is our topic on users. So we have talked about some common things you'll need to do, best practices, how to securely manage users, some examples of groups, what they do, how they work, and some scripts. If you have any questions or problems, please let me know, and I hope you are all having a lovely day.